My guest today spent nearly a decade inside one of the world's biggest mobile advertising companies, rising from customer success manager all the way to sales chief of staff. She was helping unify a 300-person global organization through a big merger, cutting tens of millions in costs without losing a single pound in revenue. She then took everything she learned about what breaks inside companies doing change and built a business around it. She's the founder of Huckr AI, a company focused on developing and upskilling teams in AI knowledge and helping organizations navigate the human side of AI transformation. She also did a course on ethics of AI at the London School of Economics, because she believes how you adopt AI matters just as much as whether you adopt it at all. She's sharp, she's direct, and she has seen the inside of AI transformation in a way very few people have. Alex, welcome to Women Lead AI podcast. As I understand, you spent nearly 8 years at Liftoff, and you went from customer success manager to the position of chief of staff for sales. At what point did you look at everything and felt like you want to be a founder of your own company? What made you decide to take that leap?
I think the honest answer is I've always hated being told what to do. And it's made me a very difficult employee. I think some of my old managers would probably agree with that. And I don't know, it's not something it was at the back of my mind for the longest time, but it's not something I was too scared to do it, right? Because jumping out and trying to do something of your own is incredibly terrifying. You lose your paycheck, your friends, or like people doing the bits for you that you don't like doing or that you're not very good at. But over the years, like I kept climbing the ladder. I did an MBA, and I really thought I would just keep going. But I just realized like the corporate stuff like never really ends, the bullshit. And even as a chief of staff, I'd work with a lot of C-level and VPs. They were still being told what to do, and it's just the only way to get out of it is really to jump, and eventually just felt like that was the only thing I could do.
And in terms of the Huckr AI, the company that you found, you're focused on training non-technical staff. How did you decide that this is the specific kind of gap in the market that you're gonna fill?
Yeah.
Like, was it specific moment, or have you looked over the past 2 years and kind of felt like that is something that's needed?
I would say, just from my experience being in corporate before as a customer success manager, so I've always worked in kind of AI and AI adjacent fields, not as a coder, but working with the tools and then working with teams who, what I did was advertising. So the people we work with were advertising manager and marketing managers. They couldn't care less about AI. They just wanted their campaigns to work. Like, the hype wasn't then what it is now. But one of the issues that we kept having was because at Liftoff, like, we built this tool that was based on machine learning, and it was really impressive, but it was also a complete black box. So you couldn't look under the hood. You couldn't, and like our clients were used to like playing with like adjusting here and there and like making tiny little tweaks to their campaigns. You couldn't do any of that. And we just kept telling them, oh, this is the ML, the machine learning, like you can't touch it. And then we ended up in a situation where one of our big clients at some point said, if you say it's the machine learning one more time, I'm going to pause all of my campaigns. So we had to kind of sit down and just think and be like, okay, we need to give them something more. And because they were my client, I then sat down with our head of machine learning, and we devised like this workshop of how do you close the gap, right? Like, what is machine learning? He really taught me from like his point of view and his technical point of view of like, what is it that they're building? and the underlying mathematics that goes, that underlines everything. And that really helped me understand kind of there's such a gap between the technology and how we want to use it in real life, and gap in language and understanding and everything else. So this like training came from that gap really, and I explained to then our client that, you know, these are the things that machine learning and AI do incredibly well, and you really shouldn't interfere there. And these are the things, the edge cases and maybe the limits of the tool. And, you know, and it turns out that a lot of their intuition when they felt like something wasn't working was actually correct. They just didn't really have the language to kind of how to explain it to us. And we didn't have the language to how to explain it to the technical people. And then I did over 100 of those talks, because once the word got out that, you know, that client liked it, then another client liked it, then another one, that really planted the seed in me that there's such a gap in language and understanding and kind of how we view the technology from technical and non-technical people.
And that was back at Liftoff.
This was back in 2018.
Okay, yeah.
So this was ages ago, and I don't think it's really changed. If anything, it's got worse because now everyone is using it and the hype is just so much, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't understand how it works and the underlying forces, I think it's really easy to believe the hype, or to fear, you know, the worst kind of fear-mongering scenarios, right? So that's where the seed got planted. Then I did an MBA, still kind of thinking I was going to be, you know, super corporate for the rest of my life. And I wrote my dissertation on how non-technical leaders can implement AI into their organizations in a way that's ethical, that doesn't create problems down the line, and like how can you ask the questions that you want to ask but you maybe don't understand the technology fully, right? Which I think is and I remember actually when I was writing in like 2020, 2021, we were talking to a bunch of different AI startups and organizations that were looking after ethical AI. And they're like, oh, there's this new startup called OpenAI. They're very small, but you should chat to those guys. And yeah, so then I think that was the whole thing of just, it's never really, I don't feel like that sentiment has changed, right? People who are technical view AI in a very particular way, and then the rest of us view it in a different way. And people use it really differently, you know, as well. So that's why we focused on kind of training the teams on just kind of getting the baseline of this is how you use your Gen AI tools, this is how you can think about it, this is when you should trust it, this is when you shouldn't trust it, right? And just get everyone on the same page. And then you can really start experimenting and coming up with like really cool, crazy ideas. But you need to make sure that everyone in your team knows what they're allowed and not allowed to do.
How do you do that, considering the fact that, you know, I hear about a new AI tool almost every day, and it feels like, you know, that train is moving at hundreds of kilometers an hour. So how can you make sure that the teams are trained kind of, it feels like they have to be trained continuously in order to keep up with technology and also get those benefits?
I don't think it's realistic to keep up to date with absolutely everything that's happening at this point. Like I'm not even trying, and I know from other people who are either AI trainers or they've built a whole like creator economy around being kind of the person that teaches you AI. No one can keep up with everything that's happening. So that's just unrealistic. What you can do, and I mean, considering like, I think it's like 50% of all VC funding now goes to AI companies, which seems, to be honest, low to me. I don't know how anyone gets money at this point without being an AI company. And I'm not being flippant, right? It's just, I'm sure they'll just like add it in somewhere just so they can get the money.
Sprinkle on top.
Yeah. So how can you keep up with every single startup that comes out of like that gets funded and doesn't get funded, right? Like my LinkedIn feed is full of SaaS startups. They're all doing like slightly different things. like my background is kind of sales and customer success. Like, do I know what all of them do? No, absolutely not. But you keep on top of the big LLMs, you keep on top of the big startups that are coming out and really getting traction. And then you just have to accept that no one really knows. And things change all the time, right? Like something that worked 2 months ago and that maybe wasn't possible 2 months ago is possible now. But I don't think you have to be the first person to jump at every single opportunity like that. And I know that controlling that feeling of FOMO it's hard for me. I want to be, like that's my job. So I need to be ahead of everything, but it's impossible.
How, considering kind of what you studied and the MBA that you mentioned, how do you think you see the ethics of AI differently? Like because of that, you were able to have that lens that a lot of people don't have. How did it make you think differently about also implementation of it in companies and how the companies should approach it?
Yeah. The way I think about it is you can go into ethics from like a very technical point of view, right? And there's all sorts of types of biases that AI can create, and a lot of it has to do with training data or the assumptions that you make when you are building the models and all of those kind of things. I think as a non-technical person or someone who's using AI, it's really unrealistic for you to go into the hood of like every single tool. Also, it's impossible, right? Because a lot of it's proprietary information. So you have to think about it in a different way, right? It's if you are using these tools, what's the potential fallout, right? And you think of that from like a PR lens, right? Like Anthropic got in the waters recently because they were working with the US government, right, who was then working with Palantir. They have a deal where they don't, I think, directly work with Palantir. But if they work with the US government who works with Palantir, that's fine, right? And it's a trade-off that they have to make, right? Like some people would say that's really unethical. And it, like 10, 15 years ago, would have been unthinkable for like a left-wing Silicon Valley company to be working on military projects. But in 2026, it's expected, right? And it's a huge chunk of their revenues. So they have to make kind of concessions or decisions somehow. So the way I think about ethics is generally think about your values. Don't get too hung up on the technical aspects of like biases and everything else where AI can go wrong. And think of your values, right? Like if you value your people at the company, don't replace them all with agents at the first opportunity, right? And like maybe down the line, that's what happens. But if you do it at the first opportunity, then, you erode a lot of the trust that you have with your team, because then they're like, well, clearly people is not what matters most to you, right? You can, and it might be the inevitable that that's the way things go, but you can do it in a different way, right? Like you can start introducing agents at the same time you train people to work with agents, right? Like you retrain some of your workforce. You give them a lot of securities around like, these are the things that we really value that humans can do that machines can't do at this point in time. And this is what we need you to focus on. Yes, your role is changing, but your livelihood is safe for now, right? So there's different ways of going about it that still protects people, that focuses on your values. So really, I start with that rather than any of the kind of technical aspect, because you can get like bogged down in the quagmire of like all the different types of biases and...
Yeah, I think it's like what you said in regards to thinking what are your values is so important, because I think when you look around, a lot of people, they adopt these tools, right, without considering what is, like as a company, what is most important to us, like what is our North Star. And I'm sure like you see that as well, whereas there is like lack of that consideration for what is important to us, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it doesn't even come from a bad place. I don't think there's like evil managers who are sat there and just like, oh, how can I create more anxiety for my teams? It's just maybe sometimes it's FOMO and they feel like everyone else is doing something. So that's what they want to do. I think the outputs and the effects are the same, but I think a lot of the time it happens because people don't think things through, not because they sit there in some evil cabal and think about how they can like impose as much harm on other people.
Okay, so let's say I'm a leader of a company that has got 50 people, and I want to, jump on the train, I want to implement AI. Like, what is one of the first questions I should be asking myself before kind of making any changes and any implementation?
I would say if you're a leader now and you don't have any AI in your org officially, and you have a 50-person org, you probably have a problem with shadow AI usage, because I don't believe that no one is using their ChatGPT or Claude on the side.
Do you want to explain what is shadow AI?
Yeah, so shadow AI is when employees use AI that hasn't been approved by the company, right? So for example, I know a lot of companies that either don't use any AI or they only have Copilot, right? Copilot at this point in time is by far the worst one out of the LLMs. It just has the worst capabilities, right? So if that's the only thing you've rolled out, and yes, you can block access to ChatGPT and Claude or Gemini on work laptops, but what you can't stop people from doing is taking a screenshot of something on their phone, putting it into their ChatGPT, and then getting the answer and copy pasting it, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously, what happens as a result of that is then you're training OpenAI or Anthropic or whoever on your proprietary company information that shouldn't really be going into those models because that data is not siloed. That's really dangerous. You can't blame people for it just because it's so, I don't know anyone who's never used one of those models at this point, right?
Feels like productivity that you can get is just...
The gains are there, right? It's so much faster. So how can you expect people to work in the 19th century, we don't expect people to ride a horse to work. So you shouldn't. And so I would say that's number one. If you don't have anything, you more than likely have a problem with shadow AI usage. So implement something. I would definitely start with kind of Gen AI tools, right? I'm agnostic. I don't care which tools companies use if they ask me for a recommendation. At the moment, Claude is definitely the best one. It's having a moment. 6 months down the line, that could change, right? 6 months ago, I would say OpenAI was probably the strongest, right? So you can implement Claude now, but it doesn't mean that maybe at some point you're going to have to also get ChatGPT or Gemini or something else. So that would be number one. And then number two, and one of the mistakes I see companies making is they kind of have this rollout and abandon approach where they give everyone a license and then they go, okay, off you go, bye. And people use it differently, right? Like some people are skeptics, other people are early adopters and kind of experts. Some people will be creating agents and automating everything of their work. Others don't even know how to prompt, right? So you really need to get everyone on the same baseline. That's the work that we do at Huckr, right? Let's just providing that training so everyone is there, they know how to use it, and it matches with kind of your guidelines, right? It could be that, for example, if you work with clients, do you want to automate? Not even automate, but do you want people using Geminis or Claudes to write all of the emails? It depends, right? Because if suddenly clients feel like they're talking to Claude and not their account manager, that could erode a lot of trust.
And it comes back to that training at that point, right? Because you can prompt it in a way, whether you do it with kind of voice, for example, where you can make really detailed prompt and it will sound like you. But if it sounds like, ChatGPT generated, then, is that a fault of not having been trained?
It probably is a fault of not having been trained, because if people don't know what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, then it's not necessarily their fault, right? I've had managers say, I don't want my teams using any ChatGPT to write emails because that's what we pay them for. And I think that's also unfair. Again, coming back to the horse, right? We don't ride a horse to work. So yes, we should be using it, but you should really think about the guardrails, right? So if you send out an email, that's with ChatGPT, and I think it's also easy to get to this like lazy point where you don't really check it, you just skim it, or you trust it to say what you want it to say. And then it can be a little bit off, and it can, especially if you're analyzing data, it can really be off, right? Like it's just, so that's what goes into the training, right? Of just like, where do you really sit down? Yes, use it to create a draft. Which are the bits that you really have to read through it? Maybe you have like a company level voice prompt of like how it's meant to sound. So it sounds as like least ChatGPT-ish possible. But yeah, that, definitely the training. Number 3 is the anxiety. I would really address that. And it's like, so in my work as a chief of staff, I was looking after like big mergers and like post-merger integration of companies, and that's incredibly anxiety-inducing for people, right? They know it's coming because there's like, well, in my case, it was 2 orgs that basically looked identical, and you couldn't keep it for so long. But it took us a long time to get to a place where we knew like how the roles were going to change, who was going to stay, who was going to go, whose management was going to go. And that's, you know, people were just stressing for like a year while we were working on it. I constantly got questions like, am I on the list, you know, this and that. So, and I don't think AI is any different, right? It's incredibly anxiety inducing, and that anxiety can eat up so much of the mental bandwidth of people. So if you don't address it, they could easily be spending half of their time trying to figure out if they're going to have a job in the next year or not. That's a huge loss of productivity. So I would really think about that. And focus on that. But that also means you need to have trust with your teams, right? Because if you just do a presentation of like, oh, these are the AI tools, you're all safe, but you don't have trust, then you've wasted everyone's time even more. So how do you build up that trust that your employees know that you're not going to let them go when, you know, like Anthropic or whoever releases a new update and suddenly you can do their jobs?
I think like what you said really rings true, because in a company where I work, you know, there was a reorganization and people got laid off, and, you know, immediately the mood like shifts completely, right? And everyone is just talking about that one thing, about like who was laid off, who's about to get laid off. And I can imagine that with AI, it might be the same, you know, the same feeling, especially when I hear that, you know, that company laid off 500 people because AI can do their job, right? And how do you make sure that people are open to that training and like reduce that level of anxiety?
Comes back to trust. You need to trust your leadership. If you don't trust it, then it's a lot harder to do that training. I think generally people understand that you can't put the AI genie back in the bottle, right? Like it's out. It's like a tsunami, right? Like that's what our life looks like. But you can reduce that mental bandwidth that anxiety takes by building up trust, building up training, right? Like focusing on, like I said earlier, right? Like, yes, your role is changing and AI can do some of those things, but this is really what we value, right? Like, for example, if you work with clients directly, maybe you go and see them more, right? And you do things like face-to-face. Maybe you do more events. So you really then focus on the relationship, but you allow AI to take over some of the kind of optimization that you would have had to do manually before, right?
And I wonder whether like a lot of companies, what they do is, you know, they get those gains in productivity, but then that means that the expectation is that you're supposed to do more work, right? But I think what you said in terms of like using that time, for example, to have, you know, more in-person meetings or create better relationships with clients, like, is so important, because then it feels like, oh, like we are using this tool, it helps us with productivity, but it also means that, you know, and it also means that the team actually benefits from it.
But on the other hand, I've also seen situations where so many tools have been released and people spend so much of their time checking the output of the tools and fixing them, and right, and like I really started kind of focusing on my LinkedIn about a year ago. So I've created like a bunch of different projects and agents that help me do some of that work. I find that like a year down the line, some of them don't work as well as they used to because OpenAI changed their models or something else. So like those things decay a lot faster than I think we're used to with like traditional SaaS and tools. So the upkeep that's required to keep all of those automations actually running how you want them to run is a lot higher. I think there's still a productivity win overall, but the more of those automations you create, then the more you have to spend doing the upkeep. So I don't think I don't really believe this zero-sum game where we can all be on the beach and, our agents are just like...
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, yeah. They're just producing everything on our behalf. And I just don't see that happening at this point.
So, let's say that I'm in an organization where we have Copilot and I use it, kind of instead of Google for drafting some emails. I feel like I'm not a technical person. I'm not, software engineer. What should I be doing in order to, to be up to date with those tools so that, if I were to get laid off, I have those skills and I can use them at the next company.
Oh, there's so many things you could do. One thing I really love telling people to do is you have to approach it as like a playful thing, an experimentation. I think that's the easiest way to see what works for you and where you can get the gains. And also it takes the pressure off things, right? Of just, you then don't expect to automate all of your work within seconds. But you could start with, putting the same prompt into different LLMs and see what the outputs are like, right? You could play around with like a really vague prompt versus a really detailed prompt and see what the difference in the answers that you get is, and just try and get that sense of what's working and develop that intuition for yourself. And then pick something easy, right, that you could maybe automate, right? So for example, if you wake up every morning and you have a million emails that came in overnight and Slack messages and something else, and you have to check all of those things, maybe you create some kind of like summary email that's just like, these are the things that need your attention. And maybe that's useful, right? Like try and create that, see how that works, keep testing it to see like, is it missing some things out that are important, right? Is it leaving them out? Is it working how you want it to work? If that's great, that's one automation you've created, but you don't need to, automate your whole life away. I don't think that's the point. And I don't think you need to be, I definitely feel that because that's probably all the social media I consume at this point, is that everything should be automated. And I don't think that's realistic, right? And also it's incredibly expensive. It eats up into credits. If you start automating everything, then the tools kind of change, right? And the outputs change, and we go back to the whole, like, you need to upkeep all of your different projects and automations and agents, etc. So just do the things that are the biggest blockers in your day-to-day, and then see how that works out. Take it slow, play around with different tools. If something doesn't work, then try something differently. I think also what's incredibly useful with all of these tools, for some reason, for me, learning, like going into a new like SaaS tool and trying to figure out like where all the buttons are and how do I get to what I want is just incredibly painful. Like I hate that. I never read instructions. I just find that boring, right? But one of the things with AI is you can say, this is the tool that I'm trying to use. This is what I want to get to. How do I do it? It doesn't always give you the right answer. Sometimes it can lead you down like a garden path. But in so many cases, it will tell you exactly how you should do something and where all the buttons are. So it, just keep trying to see where those opportunities are. Use as many of the tools as you can. Like they're not that different. Ultimately, you can use them in you can learn them in a couple of weeks. If you go to a different company and they don't use Copilot, they use something else. But just play around with them and, yeah, don't live under a rock.
I like what you said in terms of using the tools, like using, for example, ChatGPT to use a different tool, like it rings really true because my dad, he got inspired by me when I started doing like 3D printing, and he got a printer, and he lives back in Poland, so I couldn't just kind of see what is happening, so all of our conversations were over WhatsApp, and he said at some point like, oh, I'm so glad that ChatGPT is here, otherwise I would have been asking you like hundreds more questions. So I think these tools like really give you that power to, I don't know how this works. And it also, I guess, like the kind of questions that you can ask are like, sometimes you feel stupid asking someone else, but it's like your search history, right? You sometimes people are like, no, I don't want other people to see like what is happening as well.
100%. I think that's even more private than my Google search history, right? But also maybe one thing I really like doing to kind of learn and see where it's good is not focusing too much on work, but on like your personal case, right? Like a hobby, or like I've been trying to figure out, like I love fashion content and all of those kind of things, right? And then you start putting together like your body type, your seasonal color analysis, you're this, and there's so many different theories. It's overwhelming. I have no idea what I should be wearing, or like I keep buying the same things over and over again in shops. So I then fed all of that information into chat, and I told it, this is what I like. I give it pictures of like inspiration, like these are the things that like I like wearing. Does it suit my body type? Does it suit my coloring? And because at this point it knows me quite well, it then tells me how to adjust some of the outfits to like make them work for me. It tells me if something is good, if something isn't, but I found that it's helped me develop that intuition where I go around shops now. I don't want to buy everything or the same things over and over again. I'm like, okay, I have this. These are the gaps. So to be honest, at this point, before I buy anything, I put it into chat. I'm like, is this do I need this?
Yeah, what's funny is now, like, whenever I go like grocery shopping, and we've been trying to eat healthier, me and my partner, or take a picture of the yogurt and what the ingredients are and ask like, is this healthy? Or not. And I found one app where you can just scan the barcode and it will give you like a score of 73 out of 100, and if it's lower than 60 then we're not allowed to buy it. I
like that, right? It's like it's useful for those kind of things, right? And yeah, or like another thing, maybe like my background is Estonian, Russian, so just like on a family level, like we have very different political views depending on what media sphere people are in, and I have family who like have very different views on the war in Ukraine, for example, and it's really hard because there is no like middle ground in it really, right? Like you're either wrong or you're right, and depending what side you're on, that changes. But I then use chat to kind of try and understand, almost do like conflict resolution with them, and try and understand where they're coming from with their point of view and all of these things. And what I often find is the underlying, like obviously to my mind there's a lot of misinformation, right? And they're coming to the wrong conclusion, but the underlying fears or what they want to achieve, they're all valid. But we just reach different conclusions. But I've found that it's really helped me kind of mediate some of those really tricky family dynamics that I think lots of families have in this day and age, where you can be polarized on, on everything, like the wars, Brexits, like.
Yeah, I've actually never had someone say it, but now when I think about it, like it makes so much sense to use it that way, because, it gives you that perception that, and you know, you can kind of argue with it and tell your points versus what, you know, potentially the other side thinks, and it can give you that another perspective on the things, especially like the ones you mentioned.
Yeah.
So like when we think about companies and how they're like rolling out AI, like how much do you think is leadership responsible for? How much is let's say IT department responsible for, and individuals? Like who is supposed to lead, for example, on education and you know, those things?
I think generally leaders think it's an IT problem, or maybe like an HR, like L&D, you know, learning and development problem. And they don't think it's their problem. I would argue it's very much their problem from various different points of view, like the anxiety that we talked about earlier, right? Of, am I going to keep my job? Am I safe? That's a leadership problem. The tools and how do you use them? What are the values? Like, are you allowed to just like send out batch emails to clients that you haven't looked over? That's a leadership problem. That's not an IT problem. What kind of tools do you implement, or what kind of agents you build? I think that's also a leadership problem, right? I think sometimes maybe it's laziness, maybe it's like you have so much on your mind that you don't really, or you don't understand the technology well enough, and you just think, especially sometimes companies have like an AI lead, or like, oh, they'll come up with all of the things that we need, but they don't know the intricacies of the workflows of every single team. Yeah. So how do you trust them to come up with the best possible tools? Yeah. I think leaders also need much more education on the possibilities, but I think the way leaders think and the way the teams think is very different. I think for the teams, they need to know like how to prompt, when to trust outputs, when not to trust them, like when to raise an alarm, when not to use shadow AI, right? Like that's that. For leaders, they need to be thinking much more long-term and strategically. If competition came along and they built a similar company, but from the ground up, and they were AI native, what would they build? And how would that affect us, right? And then I think that can really get you to a place where you can think a little bit differently about what are the blockers.
Yeah, 100%. You know, there's a lot of talk about the fact that there is going to be a $1 billion company just made by a single person, and I think like that's definitely going to happen, especially seeing some of the like the progress with like Cloud Code. So, and the question that you ask, like, how would the company look like, is so interesting. But then what happens if the answer is, oh, we would not have like this whole department? Like, how do you evaluate that, you know, risk of potentially laying off people?
What, from a point of view of one person unicorn?
Yeah, so
or
let's say a leader is thinking, oh, if we were AI kind of native company, like this process that currently, you know, a team of 10 people is responsible for, actually it can be automated away.
Oh yeah, or we would need 1 or 2 people, right?
Yeah.
It's hard. I think leaders who start from the ground up with AI, they don't get any of the hate than the leaders who then have to let go their teams, right? But actually the outcome is in many ways the same. I think it's a great point. There's a company in like my old field, and I was in ad tech, so like advertising tech, that there's a lot of companies that use AI, machine learning, all those kind of things. But the technology was probably built 10, 15 years ago. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that's been built that works incredibly well. But the kind of the operational side or the managing it requires hundreds and hundreds of people, right? And it can be clunky in many ways. There's a company that recently kind of came about. They got a bunch of funding, and they've basically rebuilding one of the aspects of the ad tech industry, but from the ground up and AI native with all agentic work. So they're automating away a lot of the work that would normally be done by teams. They've made a huge splash, but some of the valuations dropped massively, and and they really spook the investors in that field. I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer. Like, as a leader, you're torn, right? Like, one thing you learn if you do an MBA in kind of leadership is you always have this tension, and that is leadership, is managing that tension when you're being pulled in two different directions, right? And I think as a leader now, especially as a senior leader, you will feel the push to automate everything and introduce agents and do all of those things, because otherwise you won't have a company anymore, right? But at the same time, hopefully you feel the responsibility for the teams and the people. And I don't think there is a single answer, because in different situations you would do different things. But there's an easy way, or like there are different ways of reacting to that situation. You could fire everyone, like, who was it? Not Canva, Carter did it, right? They fired like thousands of people, replaced them with agents, and then they realized actually agents can't do that, so now they're rehiring them. But they've destroyed a lot of trust, right? And in many ways, I mean, I'm glad they did it, because it serves as a lesson to so many other companies to not do that. But that's one way of dealing with it, where they didn't think of the people. But you could think of it in a way of like, okay, can I give people other jobs? What else could we do? Could we retrain them? Can we do them something else? And just go that way. But I think it's inevitable that we're all going to have to upskill and learn new things. We don't work now the same way we worked during the Industrial Revolution, and that's fine. Yeah. But it does mean that some jobs go away.
Yeah. And I think what would you say to someone? You mentioned the companies are not hiring, and like you can see that in the stats as well, in UK and in the US, where there is a need for kind of senior leadership, but when it comes to fresh graduates, actually that work can be outsourced to AI. And if let's say a law firm was hiring a new associate who would do a lot of groundwork of research, well, I've got LLM that can do all of that. So if you're in a position of like recently graduating, what do you do to survive, basically?
I don't know. It is definitely harder, and I think it's only going to get more and more harder. Having said that, I graduated in 2009, right, in the height of the financial crisis. And I was in a situation where me and my friends all had jobs lined up, and then those companies went bust. So there were no jobs. So in a way, maybe a similar situation, right? I didn't graduate into an economy that was booming. What I did is I wasted a bunch of time doing, like I did a year abroad. I had a lovely time. I don't think it was wasted. I learned a new language. Then I did something else. It just took me a little bit longer to get on the path that I wanted to get into tech. I also didn't know I wanted to get into tech. And I did some kind of not so high paying jobs at much smaller companies. But eventually I got to the place where I wanted to get to. And it ended up being fine, like I still got to like senior leadership levels. Like I think you feel as a graduate that like you really have to be kind of get the job, like get the promotion, like you're under so much pressure to achieve things really, really fast and instantly. But that's just not how life goes all the time. That's the only advice I can give really is, you're not the first people who have struggled to get jobs and have graduated in an economy that isn't booming and dying to hire you. It is harder, and sometimes it will take longer.
Yeah, I relate to it because I graduated in 2020 when COVID just started. Right, and all of the graduate schemes and all of the jobs that I was applying for, they suddenly started just sending emails out that they're stopping hiring just because they're not sure what's going to happen. And it was that like moment of, panic of what do I do? And I did have a gap of like several months between when I was able to find like a job that I was happy with, like almost over a year. So yeah, it is very difficult.
But you're okay now, right? Like you got the job, it just didn't happen instantly. Yeah, and like keep learning skills while you're looking for jobs, right? Like maybe you start a startup, and maybe that's what a grad can do. Like, there's plenty of young kind of entrepreneurs out there who've made millions, if not billions.
I think, whenever a new technology comes in, you can always think about, oh, like this is gonna like replace me, or this is like it's gonna be a challenge, or you can see it as opportunity, right? And I think that it is about that mindset, whether you think, oh, I can, I can do training for example, companies, or I can become really skilled at that one thing and, offer it as a freelancer. So I think, a lot of it is about how you think and how you see it, whether it's opportunity or it's all doom and gloom, right?
I think so. I think it's attributed to Winston Churchill, this saying, but it's like never waste a good crisis. I don't know if he actually said it, but I really believe in that, right? Like through my corporate career, I probably went through like 8 restructurings and redundancy rounds, so many, but I got promoted through more than half of them. And got promotions that I would have never got otherwise, where like I could move up, not just like from, how they love to send you from like your IC, so suddenly you're like an associate manager, and then you become a manager, and then you're an associate something else, right? And they just create so many steps. You can jump so many steps when there's like a huge crisis, because the rules are different in that situation, right? So yeah, absolutely. I think now, is the easiest time to start a company. One of the main things that all companies struggle with is trying to get clients and get the word out for how they're doing. And it's so easy to create content now with AI, right? So like half of that, and I'm not saying automate all of it away. I don't think you can do it, but it's not going to be very good content, right? But it makes it so much easier, where before it would have taken someone probably a full-time role to do that. You can probably do it in a day now, right? So that's one day of your week that you focus on kind of marketing and creating awareness, and the rest of the time you focus on building the company. It's absolutely so many opportunities are coming from this, and I don't think we know. When you were saying, what happens to employees where a company just like doesn't create a new department because they're AI native from the ground up. I think we're moving towards a world where we're not going to have huge multi-corporates. We will still, but a lot more people will be working for much smaller companies of like 5 people, 20 people, 50 people, right? Because you'll be able to do what 600 people used to do with 50 people now.
And a few hundred of agents doing the groundwork. And when you think about, companies implementing AI, like what are the mistakes? You mentioned one of them. What mistakes do you see when the company is rolling out, and what not to do, basically?
I think a lot of them we have covered. I would say one is the kind of roll out and abandon, right? So when they like roll out a license and then they just leave people to use it however they want to. The second one, and like I feel bad saying this, but if you only rolled out Copilot, you also probably have a shadow AI problem, because people just don't like using it at the moment. So that one, but also maybe a bigger point there is just not monitoring for shadow AI usage, right? And having all of your sensitive data leaked out. The trust issue, right, and the anxiety and not addressing that, I think that's a huge mistake. And then the last one maybe is stopping at rolling out an LLM, right? And being like, that's our AI strategy, or we have like a SaaS that we have for sales, we have a SaaS that we have for ops team, We have something for like our product teams, and then our engineering team uses Claude, right? Like, okay, yeah, that's an AI strategy, but it's a very like basic AI strategy. I think the companies that are really going to get ahead are the ones that are not thinking, how can I get a 10% improvement? They're thinking, how can I get a 10x improvement? And that probably means kind of thinking, okay, well, if we were building this from the ground up with agentic AI, what would we change? And where are the blockers? Where are we relying on maybe processes that don't work? Another one, I love this one, where people try and automate like a really fuzzy process that doesn't work, or a broken process, and they just like try and throw AI at it. That really doesn't work.
Where do you see as like the biggest gap between where a lot of companies are right now, and where do you think opportunity is when it comes to AI adoption?
I would love to say we're at a place where we all need to start thinking about like the 10x improvements. In reality, we're at a place where you need to make sure that everyone in your team knows how to prompt. Like, we're at such basic 101 level, and it's fine. It's a really new technology. But if we get everyone on a baseline, and also like when to use it, when not to use it, I feel like almost everyone, and not even in the knowledge economy, I think like, like farmers probably need to use AI, right? Like, and it just makes everyone's lives easier. When should you use it? When should you not use it? We all need to be upskilled on kind of the intricacies of this incredibly complex technical tool and technology.
I think, I think in a lot of organizations you have like basically two groups of people, where someone is like, oh, I'm not really a tech person, I'm not interested in this, I'm a bit anxious about this tech, and then you have someone who is like obsessed with it, and every new tool they're like on it, and usually that that second group is put then in charge of like education potentially, but they're starting with not that base knowledge, but expecting everyone to be already there, and they're like potentially they're not. Do you see that as well?
I see that. I mean, sometimes it can work, it depends, right? But I would say in the cases where it does go wrong, maybe the people who are early adopters, they don't share the same psychological fears as the people who hold back, right? And I think that's where it comes from. It's not like people do fall on this curve, right? Of like early adopters, whatever it is, like the late majority, I can't remember what all the bits are. We treat new things differently, and some people are just naturally more skeptical. But if you don't address those fears, then I mean, it doesn't matter that you show them like 10 different agents that you've built for yourself. It's if they don't want to use them because they think they're going to lose their job in like 6 months because of it, it's not going to increase adoption, right? So yes, I think it's good. You should have that. You should always have like people who are really into new tools and that help kind of create that adoption, and someone that you can always ask questions to. But would I put them in charge of training the whole company? Probably not.
Yeah, I guess, it comes back to that trust and how trusting employees are in the organization, right? Whether the organization creates an environment where saying, oh, like, I don't understand this, like, can you explain it differently? That is absolutely fine and it is expected. But a lot of environments are such that, okay, I got it, or I'll just, figure it out on my own. And that's very challenging.
It's challenging, but I think it also becomes because leaders don't really understand the technology themselves.
Yeah.
We're all just kind of feeling around in the dark. Yeah.
Would you say that like it has to start there, where the leadership gets upskilled in it and really makes it their priority to learn? Because that, that creates that cascade where you think about, use cases, you think about like how can you roll it out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It can't be like a good AI training is not just prompt training for your teams. That's really important, but that's not really where it should end, right? As a leaders, you need different things. You need to think about, can a competition create my company from the ground up with agentic AI? What does that mean? What are the downstream, like if we start using AI for hiring people, right? And suddenly it tells us we only need to hire white males. What are the PR repercussions of that? If a journalist finds out, that's a leadership problem, right? So understanding that there are biases with these tools, and even if you bring in a supplier who's going to provide it, like it's still going to be ultimately your responsibility. You can't always say that it was them. Well, look, why didn't you ask the right questions then, right? So there's different leaders also need to know how to prompt, but it goes like further beyond that of things that they need to be asking.
Yeah, like safeguards and all of those things, and where we use it, like you said, and where actually we shouldn't be using it.
Yeah, how does our culture change, right? Like how, I mean, you're not gonna have like presents and birthday parties for the agents in your workforce, but if people start also doing different things, do they like, maybe some of them will like doing those things, right? If you can spend more time with clients face to face, great. Other people might not like that, so then they might need to do something else. All of those are leadership problems.
I love this conversation, and I learned so much. I think for me the biggest takeaway was that question that you asked, like if my company was starting from the ground up, like what would the competition be doing to be if they were starting to with being AI native. But let's do a fast round of questions. Okay. So what's one AI workflow or automation that you adopted and it generally changed how you work?
Mine, content creation. I create a lot of content on LinkedIn, and it really helps me with that. Having said that, it's not fully automated. I really don't believe in full automation, but that like research, first draft, analyzing it, 100%.
What's the best use of AI that you've seen inside a company that most people wouldn't think of?
A leadership team, they started recording their meetings, and they were kind of a very established team where like there's no new blood for ages, and so they worked together quite well. They started feeding those transcripts to an LLM and just saying, can you find holes in our thinking? Yeah. And what are we missing? Where are we too in agreement with each other? What else should we be thinking about?
That is such a good use case.
And that's not, and I'm not saying trust it fully, right? But it will surface some things that you wouldn't have thought, because we all just get a bit of like inertia and set in our ways.
That is, I'm going to use that. Let's say that we kind of discussed this, but I'm someone who decides today that they're going to lean into AI rather than kind of wait for guidance. Where do I start so I can see, so I can start today and within a week kind of see improvement?
If you've never used it before,
let's say I've used just ChatGPT for questions and answers. Yeah.
I mean, first, my number one is make sure your prompts are good. Try different prompts. Try a poor prompt, a good prompt, a detailed prompt. See what the output that it gives you. And I mean, if you're using Claude, you probably have more opportunities right now for like automation, right? Just because it makes it easier. So then you could start like what I said earlier, right? Like if you wake up every morning and you have a million different emails and it's really overwhelming, try and automate that. Start with something small where you can create an automation, right? If your company doesn't allow it and you have no AI, or you have only like AI that like you can't build like little agents or whatever, do it in your personal life, right? Whatever you're doing, like maybe you create like give me the news on this topic of like what's being discussed in like social media and news and whatever, right? Try and find a contrarian point of view or like a devil's advocate point of view. Just so, another thing I like doing is, you know, with news and social media, we're so in our bubbles and it's so hard to get out of those bubbles. Actually, if you actively ask AI to take you out of that bubble, what is the opposing point of view? It does it quite well. And you can kind of try and break some of those walls a little bit. It's not an automation, but I think it's really useful for how we see the world and how we think about things.
Yeah, I've noticed I was looking for like recipes for breakfast on Instagram, right? And then my discovery page was just full of food, like all of it. And it's like, I mean, I don't really want to see, just that. So I think you definitely get into that like single mindset of just seeing like one thing or two things. So yeah. So final question. If you could like share one message to every person that's sitting in a company right now, wondering whether AI is going to make them more valuable or it's going to make them redundant, what would be that message?
If a majority of your role is doing things that AI, and by AI I really mean LLMs, right, does really well as well, you're probably in the danger zone, right? So if your role is coordinating information, finding, like reading through things to like find information, summarizing things, you're in danger zone. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be out in a year. Focus on, hopefully your role has some other aspects, focus on those, right? So even if you're doing mostly, let's say you like find insights from like different reports and you combine them into something else, right? Or you're doing marketing, like content creation, right? Like super primed for automation. You can then use your judgment and your intuition that you've developed over the years to guide the AI and the machine, like how you should be doing and where your values lie. And so there's ways that you can kind of spin it. But then the other thing I would say, just because you're doing it doesn't mean you're going to be kept. The game of corporate politics is visibility. So, you have to play the game. So be really, really loud about all the things you're doing that machines can't do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good advice. If someone wanted to work with you and their company, how should they get in touch?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can DM me or alex@huckr.ai.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.